Hi, folks. Supervisor George Hoehmann, and welcome back to our second ever podcast, Hoehmtown Happenings, the podcast. Today, we're going to have a very interesting discussion. If you wanted to know how things are getting built in the town of Clarkstown, we're going to be discussing planning and zoning and building within the town with two of our key staff, Joe Simoes, our town planner, and Jeff Gillies, our director of economic development. So stay tuned. We're here talking about planning. It's really important for the future of our town. So, Joe, somebody wants to develop, open up a restaurant, build a new restaurant or a new business in the town of Clarkstown. Walk us through what they have to do.
Well, the first thing I'd want to know is, are they opening up that restaurant in an existing space in the town? If that's the case, then they're really just going to the building department and applying for a building permit. But even then, the building department is going to look at see whether they fit into that space, and that's where zoning comes in, right? Is the zoning, are they compliant with the zoning for that particular property they're thinking of opening their business in? If that's the case, then the next thing is, does the space fit for their establishment? Do they have enough parking? Is usually the one of the main factors, particularly with a restaurant. If they're trying to open up a brand new site, right, a new establishment from scratch on a piece of property, that's when they come into my office, the planning department. So we look at the new developments in the town. Same thing, we ensure that they meet they're zoning compliant, that they meet all the requirements for that particular property. So town is zoned. We have a zoning map that indicates what uses are allowed and which aren't throughout the town. Commercial zones allow restaurants, but even then there are certain criteria that they have to meet. In some zones they have to be on a major highway, in other ones they don't.
So Joe, this is like planning 101. Like,
yeah.
What we'll often hear from people like, well, people can just apply and they can build right away. And that's really not the case. Like, we have zoning that's outlined. Maybe you could just get a little bit into, like, what's kind of allowed where. Like, I mean, if you wanted to open up a restaurant, you couldn't do that in a residential neighborhood, correct?
Correct, right.
So where could you do a restaurant? I know our zones are pretty comprehensive and they vary from hamlet to hamlet, but but kind of give our residents an idea of how that works.
So off the bat, you'd figure you'd be opening up a restaurant where there are other restaurants, right? So on Route 59, mostly zoned regional shopping. Community shopping's another one. Our hamlet centers allow restaurants, but all of them have nuances as to the sizes of the restaurants, what kind of roads they have to be on, how much parking they need. So I would be going through that with an applicant, saying, okay, you found a piece of property. Presumably, you've checked to see whether the it's zoning compliant. We get into the intricacies of that, like I said, and then they have to go through a process. Let's say it all works out; they're in the right zone. They can apply. Their first step is coming to a meeting of the technical advisory committee. So we have our town engineer, town attorney, myself from the planning department, someone from the building department review every application. So we tell applicants they can come in with something as simple as just a sketch to get started, or a full application that's fully engineered. So with a sketch, we can at least lay out, all right, where is this building going to be, right? We get into how large, where it gets placed, how much parking is required for that, the access to the road. Once we see that, we start to get into whether it's compliant with the zoning requirements and whether maybe needing a variance. We're always trying to get a project that doesn't need a variance. And variance is where they don't exactly meet the criteria of the code. The use is allowed, but maybe it's too big. Maybe they don't have enough parking. So it's a reiterative process. We keep going through. We can have several meetings. It could take months, sometimes even longer, to go through a project.
When do these TAC meetings take place?
So we have meetings every Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock.
And people can...
yeah, they're virtual. We started doing virtual during COVID, and we just kept with it. It helped, residents can participate. They can see those meetings. We have them every
They can
morning.
view them, but
they can view them, but
but-
they actually
but-
can't participate.
Right.
So that's a distinction that I make at every TAC meeting. Public hearings, that's when residents can come and voice their concerns. At every TAC meeting, it's just kind of a listen only, but we have visuals, we have the site plans that people can look at. We put them up on the screen. We're discussing issues from all the staff that gets raised there. Their engineer is there. There's a back and forth on the project. And I always tell folks if they're listening in, they can always send an email. They can call me. Oftentimes after a meeting, I get a call from a resident and asking additional questions about the project. So, that's how the process works.
So really to simplify that, basically TAC is the first time that any application is really going to be presented in a public forum. And TAC is really looking to make sure that the application itself has all the information that the planning board needs to make a determination on that project, right? Or is all the information in there that they need to review. And then, as Joe mentioned, in TAC, we will start to offer some guidance or some advice to the applicant. Hey, based on our knowledge of the planning board, based on past applications, we think you're going to have a problem here with the way a fire truck circulates, or we think you're not going to have enough parking. So let's talk about where you might be able to address those things now before you get to the planning board. But on a very basic level, TAC is just the very first step of taking an application and kind of bringing it out to the public.
And then from TAC, Joe, it eventually goes to the planning board, correct? Now, do people, when they first come in to TAC, and when even a project gets to the planning board, is it just approved the way in which people propose it?
Oftentimes it changes dramatically between when they come in, right? They may think they'd be able to build something, and then by the end, it could be a different kind of project. Usually, they try to build something larger, and by the end, it's something smaller.
And
because
why can't we tell people no? Why can't we just say you can't develop?
It's property rights, right? So in the Constitution, we have the right to enjoy our property and to be able to develop it in a particular way, as long as they're in conformance with our codes, and also state and federal regulations. They have a right to build. We have a right, however, to make sure that how they build doesn't impact the town, their neighbors, the area, and that's where the environmental review comes in. And when I talk about environmental reviews, most people think it's maybe just having to do with nature, but the environmental review covers the gamut. It's health concerns, it's parking, transportation, traffic. It's basically any type of an impact is covered under the State Environmental Quality Review Act. So the state regulations that we have to comply with. For every project. So that's another part of the process. We're not just looking at this and saying, okay, do you comply with these regulations? But even if you comply, you may have an impact to the neighborhood, and we're saying, well, what are you going to do about it? You have to mitigate it. So there's studies they have to perform. If they show that there's some sort of an impact, let's say the traffic impact. They have their experts, we have our experts. We go back and forth and we say, well, this is going to cause a problem on this road. What are you going to do about it? They may have to put in a traffic signal, upgrade equipment. A lot of our traffic signals need to be upgraded. If we find that there's an impact, they're on the hook basically to upgrade our traffic signals, widen the road, put in sidewalks. There's some off-site improvements that usually have to occur for a project to move forward.
Can you reference a project, either one of you, where a lot of off-site improvements were done? I know I'm thinking of one where there were some improvements on a state highway, but and there was a lot of fear that this was going to become a huge traffic generator. But after the project's done, it frankly looks like it probably improved traffic and hasn't been the concern that people thought it was. What would be, can you think of a project, or could you think of the types of improvements that have actually been done that the taxpayer didn't have to pay for, that actually was done as part of a development?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit counterintuitive, right? And people hear that you're adding more traffic and they think that everything is just going to inherently get worse automatically, right? And that's understandable. But what people don't take into account is, as Joe mentioned, as part of your environmental, traffic. Traffic is studied for all of these projects as part of the environmental review. So there's a traffic study being done for any project that meets the threshold of requiring a traffic study. Any major project in the town is going through a traffic study. And not only is that traffic study encompassing the traffic that that project is going to generate, it's also going to look at any other projects that are in the area affecting those same roads, and it has to account for those projects. So, that's one clarification right off the bat, that it's a very common misunderstanding that people have, that, hey, you're only looking at the traffic for this particular project. And again, it's counterintuitive. If you're adding traffic, people just assume that things are getting worse. Not necessarily the case. Joe can talk about, without getting into specific projects, but the fact that we have a base of traffic lights that are not the most modern technology. And it's extremely expensive to do that. So when a project comes in and says, hey, we want to add X amount of traffic to the road, they're being told, well, if you're going to do that, you've got to mitigate it, right? And you've got to mitigate it in a way that our traffic consultant is going to be comfortable with to say that, yeah, we agree with that. We don't just take their traffic consultant's word for it. Of course they're going to tell you everything's better, right?
So, and let's get to that, because another common misconception, and I've heard people's frustrations. They don't want something to be developed. Maybe they live right next to it, or they don't want it to happen. Whatever it might be, an ice cream store, a restaurant, whatever it might be. And so they hear there's a traffic study. You're like, oh, well, so what? People, they're just going to say what they want. But people put their licenses on the line, correct? And people could be sued. People could lose their license. I mean, these traffic engineers are not just, they're not just somebody that's pulling off of the street, either for the applicant or for the town. And there's different engineers, right? The applicant has an engineer. The town has an engineer. Tell me a little bit about what their responsibility is.
So, I mean, normally the traffic study is conducted initially by the applicant, the traffic engineer, right? They're actually conducting, residents may actually see people out there putting equipment out, and they're actually taking counts at different intersections. They may be pulling information actually from the cabinets. Our traffic engineer has access to our cabinets, and they can actually go in there and see the timing, how the controllers are working. So that all that data is basically crunched by the applicant's traffic engineer, and then our traffic engineer looks at it and says, you forgot this, you didn't do this at the right time. Right? It'll go back and forth a few times with our traffic engineer, because there's also, when was the study conducted? Did you do it, during the day, during the night, when the peak periods are? Once they decide, yes, all the data's here, then they project it out. Say, okay, this project is anticipated to be built in 2 or 3 years. How much traffic will be on the road there? There's an escalator, basically figuring a certain percent growth. I believe it's like 2%. Is what the county recommends every year of growth as a background growth. And then they add all the traffic from all the other projects that potentially may be coming through the pipeline. That all gets added and inflated, and then they say, all right, this is the potential impact. That's where our traffic engineer says, okay, you have an impact. What are you going to do to mitigate it? Now, it may just be a few seconds that they have to mitigate, but it's a few seconds on top of maybe 30 seconds or a minute of you waiting at a light. And typically they can try to say, well, we'll retime it, we'll do something. What we've been pushing is an actual total upgrade of the light. So you'll see these 360-degree cameras. That's what we're putting on all of our traffic signals now. Basically, they read the cars coming from every direction and decide who needs more green time and who's going to get the red, right? So that's what we've been doing. And then we've gone even further. During the development, we will hold back certificate of occupancies if those traffic mitigations aren't put in place. And it's not just traffic lights. So pedestrian crossing, we had a pedestrian crossing hold up a project for several months, but we're kind of holding the line. We're not going to let you open up a business if all of the impacts aren't mitigated. Everything that the applicant agreed to put in is in place. So, it's from start to finish. TAC actually, the Technical Advisory Committee kind of sandwiches the development process. We start it off, it goes to planning board.
And during the planning board, there's multiple public hearings.
There's multiple public hearings. That's when you have kind of your we're doing it from a technical standpoint, right? That's when you have the planning board's role there is really as members of the public, their own experience perhaps going to that location and the traffic that they're dealing with or whatever other issues, right? They may bring up their other issues. Maybe they go to the site and they see, this is kind of unkept. You haven't been maintaining your property or whatever they point out. The applicant's there. They have to do something about it. They know that their approvals are on the line. So that's where you have the planning board. Residents come out. They can say, I have an issue. I live near there. I may be looking at this site. That's when the planning board says, you need to put screening. You need to put fencing. Maybe the site needs to be reduced. And just going back to your other point, we do have projects that have come in. We had one project that came in that actually wanted to have 2 fast food establishments on one piece of property. And while that was allowed, we knew that would be complicated. So we told that applicant, said, you're better off sticking with one. And that's what they did. By the time I got to the planning board, you're talking about...
They weren't happy about it.
They weren't happy about it. By the time I got to the planning board is just seeing, kind of, we've already gone after that applicant, that developer, getting that project down to a reasonable size, so that when the planning board gets at it, they can continue on the process. But those projects have gotten, kind of whittled down in a sense.
Right before they even got to the planning board. So
Right.
as a function of TAC and a function of conversations that I have with applicants, that Joe has with applicants, we tell them, hey, look, we don't think that the planning board is going to be keen on what you're proposing here, and you've got some challenges. And in the case of the 2 restaurants, we said, look, everything about your site plan that doesn't work is caused by this second location. If you get rid of that, all your problems are gone, and you're going to have a much better, easier time at planning board. So if you're looking to get this project through in a timely fashion, my advice is to drop that second QSR, this second quick service, and come in with the one. And that's what they did. So in a lot of cases, a lot of those things are done kind of behind the scenes, if you will, but they're done in the interest of getting a project into the town that's going to be a better project, that's going to be more likely to get approved, and save the planning board and everybody else a lot of time and energy on wasting things that could be reduced or mitigated prior to even getting there. And then, Joe, one more thing about the traffic, because George, that was a great question. Why can't we just say no, right? In a lot of cases, the traffic is the function that people are looking at and saying, we don't think that works for us. And Joe, you mentioned, the adaptive lights and the smart traffic lights. Who's paying for that?
Right. I mean, that's all borne by the applicant, right?
And how much, to upgrade a traffic light, how much could it be?
So for a 360-degree camera, it's about, and the equipment, the technology that goes behind it is at least $60,000 per light. A brand new traffic signal itself is between a quarter to $500,000, depending on the on the intersection. It's probably getting closer to $500,000. So that's a brand new signal. But if you're just putting in just one signal with the new equipment, that's $60,000. It gets more once it becomes adaptive. We're kind of throwing out terminology. I mean, that 360 camera.
So 360 gives you a view of the entire intersection, and it can be adaptive. So a lot of lights are fixed timing, and then the timing can be adjusted
based on the 360 camera. So it's basically it has a default, but then it reads, all right, there's a bunch of cars coming. There's a bunch of cars coming in this direction. I'm going to give it green time to get through the light. The next level from that is the adaptive, where you have a sequence of lights kind of all talking to each other.
And that's how we improve.
That's how we improve
traffic
flow across the town.
Even when you're adding cars, you're still improving traffic.
Right. And in order for the town to do it, I mean, we have 55 traffic lights roughly in the town.
We have as many traffic lights in the town of Clarkstown than all the other towns combined.
Right, because we have 60% of the commercial ratables. It's both a blessing and a curse because it really helps our tax base, but in the end, there's a lot of other services that we're paying for that we have to provide because we have so much commercial here. We have a very full-service town government because of it. We're almost out of time, but I do want to just kind of bring it back to, so, I'll often hear, why do we allow housing in our downtown areas? Or why do we allow a restaurant over in this area? And if you could just very quickly kind of answer that for our residents, why do we allow certain things in certain places? Was it just somebody woke up one morning and said, hey, let's have apartments here, or let's have restaurants here? How did it happen, and why does it continue to go this way?
So it actually starts with something called a comprehensive plan. So there is a plan that we update every 10 years or so that lays out kind of the vision for the town, the kind of land use we want to have, and the zoning is what actually controls it. That's the actual nuts and bolts of the law, saying what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. The comp plan, like I said, it just kind of it's a vision. It basically says what kind of development do you want to have, and so it's what we always go back to. When a property owner comes in and says, maybe they want to change the zone, they want a different kind of use that's not in conformance with the zoning code. We look at our comp plan and we say, well, was that our vision? Is that what we really wanted to do? So when we're talking about housing, our last comp plan, which was in 2020, we did an extensive outreach, and it was identified not only our technical review of the town, but through various surveys. We think we had a few hundred people, even 1,000 people, kind of get involved in that plan, the latest plan. When we talked about reusing or what kind of zoning we wanted in different parts of the town, we heard from a lot of folks that it makes sense to have housing in our commercial areas. That being said, the flip side of that is not allowing overdevelopment or single-family residential neighborhoods. But there was a call to have more apartment type development in our hamlet centers, in our commercial areas, redeveloping those sites. So it serves two purposes. It's housing for young adults, right, or workforce, people who are downsizing. The housing that we have been allowing is 1 or 2 bedrooms, right? So that's the max you'll see in any of our hamlet centers.
And we also have set-asides for first responders and
we have set-asides for affordable housing for emergency service volunteers and veterans. So that's that was another comment. A lot of comments we received from folks was how difficult it is for our emergency service and veterans to afford to live in the town. So that was a goal of creating that affordable housing. Was to provide that for those folks.
So this has been extraordinarily clear and helpful, and I think there's a lot of misconceptions. People don't really understand what's happening with how the process works. We have an award-winning comprehensive plan. It's designed on an environmental impact statement, which is at the heart of the environmental review process for all planning and zoning. And just one last, and very quickly, 30 seconds to a minute each. There's been a number of attempts by the state government to take away zoning control from the towns. There's a nationwide housing crisis, and can you maybe just speak to what's been happening from the state level, some of your perspective, and if we could, fairly quickly.
Yeah, so for the last, I'd say 4 or 5 years, we've had different initiatives be put forward on the state level that essentially takes away zoning control in one aspect or the other. We had the
ADUs, I think, was the
right?
first one. Accessory dwelling units.
Right.
And what that was proposing is that, hey, we all own single-family homes, right? We would be able to build at least one accessory dwelling unit on our property. At least one. And then what they did is they did away with all the local controls that we have in terms of, forget about the use, right, permitting that, but setbacks in terms of how far away that would be from your property line, parking requirements, means of ingress and egress. they threw that all out the window. It was really horrible. And, all three of us were involved in opposing that, up to the state. So that was the first.
And there's been others as well. So, again, I don't think this is something that's going to stop at the state level. There's this legislative session. There's yet another bill that's been introduced. So why is it important that we should control our zoning and not the state?
I mean, we're the ones that would have to deal with the impact of these changes, right? It's our neighborhoods, right? It's our residents. We're residents here, and it impacts us. We're the ones who know. We're on the ground, and we're closest to what the issues are. So it makes sense that we have control over zoning, right? It's a home rule state, and what that means is it's closest to home, yeah. Right? People who are closest to your home are the ones who really should be in charge, ruling over their zoning, and that's you can't get closer to home than local government. So that's been the case for decades. When zoning was first introduced in the country in the early 1900s, there's only a handful of states that don't have home rule. And
home rule means that
rule means that the local municipality, the smallest unit of government, has control over land use.
That's why when there's a proposal in a village, we have two villages. We have the village of Upper Nyack and a portion of the village of Spring Valley. Not all of Spring Valley, only about 10%. Mm-hmm. But when there's a proposal, even though it might be within the town of Clarkstown, if it's in that village, because of the principle of home rule, they're much smaller
right.
as a government, but they can control their zoning instead of, so it seems, pretty obvious that we would want to make sure that we are controlling our own zoning and our own development, not the state.
That's right.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for really explaining this process. We didn't get into the minutia of all the boards and all the steps. But I think our residents will learn that it's a lengthy process, can be. There's a lot of checks and balances. There's a lot of other agencies that are involved, from New York State DOT to the county planning department to environmental agencies. And then ultimately, I think people will get a sense that while we have dedicated staff that are working to help people as they apply for appropriate projects, there's also a process in place to make sure that there's not inappropriate development. And I want to thank you for adding some insight for our residents.
Thank you.
Thank you.